Hello, thank you for joining me in a new video. This time I have a comprehensive review of the Huawei Mate X-T, the tri-fold folding device. Let's begin. This is the first foldable of its kind, so it introduces a new category. Thus, we can say it competes solely in terms of both price and category. The announced price for Mexico is 69,999 pesos, which is over $3,570. However, keep in mind that prices here differ from those elsewhere. It does not have any single competitor, neither in its price range nor within its category. So, in a sense, it is a device that stands alone in competition. There is no other to challenge it as of now, although there are rumors that Samsung will soon release the Galaxy G Fold. However, those are just speculations. In this situation, its distribution is managed exclusively through the Huawei store. I have left the purchase link in the description in case you are interested, but how about you join me to explore everything point by point? What can it offer us? Well, it is evident that the design will be truly spectacular, standing out as its strongest feature due to its unique format that we have not encountered until now. Interestingly, despite being a foldable device, we only see one screen. I mention this because most foldables usually provide us with two screens. However, in this instance, Huawei has opted for a single folding screen. This choice might also give you a sense of increased fragility, considering that this folding screen is entirely exposed to the outside environment, although Huawei ensures that it comes with a structure composed of non-Newtonian fluid materials that should give us a higher level of resistance compared to other folding screens. In addition, it is also said that they have improved the ultra-thin glass to be 30% more resistant to impacts, but I do not have the slightest intention to test the resistance of this device. No doubt it is a very advanced foldable, but at the same time, if it gives the feeling of being a fragile foldable, that there is. I have been testing it extensively, and it has not shown any signs of damage. However, I have not yet used it as my personal device. The fact that the folding screen is on the outside definitely encourages one to be more cautious with it compared to other foldable models. When folded, on the right side, you will find the volume buttons along with the on-off button, which also serves as a fingerprint reader. It's quite thin, by the way. Additionally, as part of the right frame, we have the foldable screen, which we could also, to put it simply, it is somewhat exposed. In order to protect it, Huawei has included a cover right in the box. This cover adds a type of folding frame, which will only leave the buttons visible, to provide a bit more protection for the folding screen. So, I believe it's a device that you likely need to use with the case on. At the top, we can find the grill for the secondary speaker, along with a microphone and an infrared port. By the way, it features a symmetrical design, making it a very attractive device. Makes it look very good. On the left, we see just a hinge and a slimmer screen frame, while at the bottom, there's another microphone, the tray for two SIM cards, the USB-C port, and finally, the main speaker grill. We can find this device, let's say, in three configurations. With a single screen, the thickness is 12.8 mm. Yes, much thicker than today's traditional smartphones, but not much thicker than today's foldable ones. So truth be told, considering we're talking about a tri-fold foldable, Huawei has done a spectacular job. When we have it in a screen format that is fold type, the device is going to have a thickness of 7.45 mm in the thickest area, 4.75 mm in the thinnest area. And ultimately, when we completely unfold the device into a kind of triple screen setup, we will observe a thickness of 3.6 millimeters in the thinnest section and 4.75 millimeters in the thickest section. This is truly astonishing. The level of thinness that this device achieves is simply remarkable. Additionally, we will notice aluminum frames, but regrettably, there is no water resistance at all, which means in that regard, we can conclude that it is a somewhat more delicate device overall, edition than we would have preferred. However, the hinges are extremely well engineered. Huawei states that they utilize multi-directional flexible materials, enabling the device to withstand compression when folded inward and also endure tension when folded outward. As I mentioned in earlier content, there's a bit of a learning curve involved in folding and unfolding the device. Yet once you become accustomed to it, the action becomes significantly easier. The hinge is crafted from components of ultra-high strength steel, precisely 1900 megapascals. As such, Huawei has ensured it has a robust resistance. However, without a doubt, the lack of water resistance is an area that Huawei will need to focus on improving for future generations. On the back, there is a very attractive synthetic leather cover. I currently have the black edition, but it is also offered in a sort of red edition, brown. In each case, it is paired with gold for the highlighted tones. As you might be aware, this device is associated with the ultimate design surname, which belongs to Huawei's luxury series, and these luxurious finishes are evident even in the small ring encircling the camera, where you will observe certain textures. The octagonal shape of the camera module is also a characteristic that Huawei often includes in its luxury editions. So, it's a device that will undoubtedly be incredibly advanced when it comes to both the design and the engineering aspects behind it. However, it still has room for improvement, especially when considering its water resistance capabilities. By the way, Huawei also includes a case that not only protects the side I previously showed you, but also provides access to a small tab, which is very similar to what we had already seen on the Mate X. This small tab functions as a stand to recharge the device while it's placed on a table. Interestingly, even though it's a foldable device, it typically doesn't encourage us to keep the device partially folded in the flex format that Samsung has made popular, and that we've noticed in other foldable devices too. So, in this case, we can say that it doesn't make much use of these intermediate folding positions, but rather it encourages us to utilize the device in a completely folded format on a screen. With a semi-deployed format is available in 2 screens, and then there's the fully deployed format with 3 screens. However, the manufacturer has not implemented any kind of optimization to make the most of these semi-folded formats, not even in the camera interface. As a result, the software appears to be poorly exploited and not well adapted to these semi-folded formats, just as I've been telling you. Therefore, this tab makes a bit more sense, because you could begin watching a movie with the device fully unfolded on a table. However, I must inform you that the tab is located on the right side of the device. Therefore, if you do not position it precisely in the exact spot, the device could potentially slip. Thus, these trifold foldable formats still present numerous areas of opportunity to explore for optimizing their use. We shall see whether in the next generation Huawei continues with the same design or decides to make some adjustments to enhance the user experience. For now, I truly believe it is quite beneficial that Huawei has decided to venture into launching this device for sale, clearly positioning itself as a leader in innovation within this particular segment. Now, let's dive into discussing the screen. It is a single screen, yet as I mentioned, it can operate under various modes. When the screen is fully extended, it measures 10.2 inches diagonally, boasting a resolution of 2232 by 3184 pixels. This provides us with a 16:11 aspect ratio more or less, allowing you to make the most out of it quite effectively. Space. The pixel density is 382 pixels per inch, which ensures that all content appears quite sharp. Naturally, this pixel density remains consistent across all settings. When the device is completely folded, the horizontal resolution measures 1008 pixels with a 1992:9 aspect ratio. To give you a better idea, this is very close to a 20:9 ratio, which is quite similar to the size and aspect ratio we typically see on traditional cell phones. Even though the addition of a considerably thicker frame on the right side of the case makes it feel far more asymmetrical than we would prefer, this is actually to protect the screen. When we are operating in the semi-deployed mode or using the dual screen, we will have a diagonal measurement of 7.9 inches. The horizontal resolution will be 2048 pixels with a 9889 ratio, which is more or less square. In this particular case, we are discussing an OLED screen that is of exceptionally good quality, which means it will provide us with excellent contrast and also very high quality colors. However, in this instance, it only offers 2 color settings. We can see the normal setting and the vivid setting. Actually, with the vivid setting, the screen tends to become a bit cooler than I personally prefer, so I opt to use the manual mode. It doesn't have an automatic adjustment for the color temperature, as it is entirely manual. Considering the price, we could certainly request a special sensor to adjust the color. In fact, the camera device includes a special sensor that I believe they could utilize to automatically calibrate the screen's color, but I haven't implemented that feature. The manufacturer does not specify any maximum peak brightness. However, you should be aware that the screen is sufficiently bright for good viewing, although typically, folding screens tend to produce slightly more brightness. About reflections, however, in this instance, it includes a factory-applied mica that effectively minimizes reflections. Moreover, regarding the wrinkles that appear in the crease area, while they might be there, they aren't very pronounced or noticeable. Especially when the screen is on, I believe you can easily forget they exist. This is particularly true when viewing the content directly from the front. If you're viewing from the side or specifically focusing on the side, you might notice them more, but generally they aren't very apparent. If you look closely for the marks of these wrinkles, yes, you will definitely find them. That is quite obvious. However, I believe Huawei has done an outstanding job in trying to make the screen as smooth as possible. Regarding the minimum brightness, you will find a quite satisfactory experience. The dimming frequency is 1440 Hz, so when you are using these minimum brightness settings, you will not perceive any flickering sensation on the screen. Although it does not include an extra dimming mode, which would ideally be, I would really like to decrease the brightness even further. As you can see, there are quite a few small things and details that the manufacturer could be optimizing and enhancing to ensure your device is truly outstanding. However, no device is perfect. I'll just highlight the aspects I'm observing in this device. Regarding the refresh rate, we surprisingly find a 90% Hertz screen. Naturally, given the high cost, one might anticipate encountering a screen with the 120 Hz. Or even more. Honestly, I do not mind seeing 90 Hz, because either way you will see fluid movements. Also, battery consumption is much more controlled, and believe me, the battery is a precious element in such a thin device. So, we will not see a very high update rate, but with 90 Hz, it provides fluid movements and a good balance in power consumption. Overall, I can say that the screen is truly very good. Regarding the sound, the experience is quite positive. Although the speakers don't produce a very loud sound, it's understandable given the slimness of the device. However, the sound quality is perceived as good, with a notable presence of bass. It's evident that we don't have a direct comparison point with other devices, as there are others in this specific category. Therefore, we can say the sound quality is good. Let's listen to a small test, but do keep in mind that it won't be the same as hearing it live. The way the speakers are positioned lets us keep the stereo sound experience whether the device is folded horizontally or fully unfolded. Even though one speaker is located at the top and the other at the bottom, the stereo sound remains consistent. However, when the device is in the semi-folded format, we will need to cover one of the speakers while using it. This ensures that the audio quality is maintained across different modes of use, providing a versatile listening experience. So this is yet another one of those small details that could potentially come to happen with these devices, which rely on innovative ways to function. By the way, I think I hadn't mentioned this before, but when it comes to finishing the deployment of the device, at times it feels like you need to use your fingernails for the final section of the screen. It's just a curious little detail. Additionally, I would have really liked to see an equalizer available through software for the speakers, because considering we have the HUAWEI high-tech sound effects that they include audio presets, D and 10-band equalizer, but that works exclusively when you have headphones connected, so there is no way to customize the audio from the speakers. For headphones, we also find a bass amplifier, a technology called Sound Booster. But at the software level, I think HUAWEI still needs to develop a little more options for the user to enjoy some more advanced options that we do see in other manufacturers, such as application sound, independent volume control per application, or independent control of volume for each application. Overall, it seems that there are several aspects that HUAWEI needs to keep working on. When it comes to headphones, it's evident that there won't be space to accommodate a 3.5mm jack, so you'll be entirely dependent on wireless headphones. Alternatively, if you wish to enjoy audio without latency, you'll need to use an adapter or USB-C headphones. However, if latency in wireless headphones isn't a major concern for you, then there's some good news, because it provides support for the LDAC codec, which is designed for high-resolution audio. Additionally, it includes the LCL codec, which represents a new codec tailored for low-energy audio through Bluetooth Low Energy. Naturally, the handset's flagship codec is LHC, which is Huawei's proprietary codec, developed specifically for delivering ultra-high resolution audio on FreeBuds. I appreciate that Huawei offers its own codec, yet it doesn't compel you to purchase its branded headphones to experience ultra-high resolution audio. I think the experience is well covered. About the microphones, there are 3 around the phone. Let's test them. Note, I have the air conditioning on.
Estás escuchando una prueba de audio grabada con los micrófonos integrados del Huawei Mate XT Ultimate Design.
Voices will be captured well, but there's no special mode for noise cancellation during calls. This is an area for software improvement. Now, let's hear how these microphones perform in a noisier environment. Obviously, at the beginning of the clip, the sound was not perceived with so much definition. When we raised the volume to maximum, fortunately, there was no more distortion, but there was a little more definition. So the microphones, I think they behave well without being the most perfect thing in the world. Finally, in this block, the vibration motor is on the x-axis, which is obviously expected in a premium device. And even though it is a foldable device, it is perceived with good strength, especially when you have with the device folded, and even when you unfold it, you still experience a really good quality vibration motor. I don't notice any part of the cell phone where it feels stronger or weaker. So, for instance, when you're typing on the keyboard, the feedback you receive will feel very premium and satisfying. Here, it's important to mention another point about the software. Other manufacturers utilize this vibration engine more extensively throughout different areas of the system, such as when we toggle switches or perform various actions. When we adjust the sliders and make other modifications, the haptic engine experience does not feel as premium or high-end as it does with other manufacturers. This is mainly due to the software. As you can see, there are multiple areas where the software experience specifically lacks, even though the hardware itself is exceptional and outstanding. The front-facing camera on this particular device boasts 8 megapixels, featuring an f2.2 aperture along with a fixed focus. It is strategically placed within a cutout on the folding screen, which is perfectly centered when the device is fully opened. Folded down, although it remains on the left side when the device is fully deployed. Generally, the front cameras on foldables aren't usually very prominent or anything like that, although in a moment you'll see that in the results it surprised us for the better. But you know that generally what is recommended in these foldable devices is to use the rear system to take selfies. With the case on, there's little confusion, just press the button in the upper left corner to open the phone traditionally. The active screen stays on this part, letting you take selfies with your desired settings. However, without the case, it might be confusing as you could try to unfold the wrong area. And you notice that there is both a camera and a screen area, so you might assume that you could activate this mode there. However, the phone indicates that it's not meant to be used in that way. Therefore, I'm explaining that it involves a bit of a learning curve when you're using this device for the first time, in order to try and make the most of its foldable features. Nonetheless, as I mentioned earlier, this phone won't really let us fully utilize its folding capabilities because it's important to note that if we want to take a selfie using this stand mode, the external screen actually gets deactivated while the internal screen is activated. However, this internal screen doesn't adapt its view to fully utilize the two halves of the phone. Once again, it appears that the software could benefit from a bit more optimization in this regard. Interestingly enough, if you want to try and take advantage of this kind of flex mode with the front camera, you need to completely unfold the cell phone first and then fold it back. In that situation, it will indeed show you this screen. This is definitely the best method to take selfies using this cell phone. It features a stand with a quick, short opening gesture by pressing the volume down button twice. However, it's important to note that this gesture will only function when the device is folded. Therefore, if you're engaged in another activity on the phone and wish to access the camera swiftly, there isn't a gesture available. You will have to navigate back to the main camera and manually open it, as is customary with devices. HUAWEI. When you rotate to the front camera, it will automatically switch to portrait mode as well. Personally, that's something I don't really like, because if you suddenly have the blur effect enabled and you don't even realize it, your pictures might end up looking quite different than you expected. So, it's important to pay close attention when you're about to take a selfie to ensure whether you have a blur effect enabled or not. It is important to note that in this particular case, the response speed might not appear to be the very best, but it is certainly adequate to provide us with a satisfactory experience. Besides the blur effects that we discover here, there will also be the availability of the beauty effect, which includes 3 distinct options. These options are designed to unify the skin, refine the face, and also alter the tone of your skin. Therefore, in this scenario, the results will not appear as artificial or fake as they might on some other devices. At the very top, we will come across another button that enables us to display various color filters, even though they cannot be previewed in real time. However, something that has personally bothered me quite a lot about this folding phone is that it lacks the palm capture gesture. Trust me, in a folding device, it is much more comfortable and secure to hold the phone safely, having complete assurance that it won't slip and fall. But in this regard, it is quite complicated to press the shutter of the camera. On the screen, it might seem more comfortable to just use a gesture to take a picture, but no, you actually have to press the volume button and then you can capture the photo. For instance, if you're using the rear cameras for a selfie, the volume button is positioned a bit higher, which again doesn't allow for gesture support. Consequently, using the camera to take selfies might be somewhat complex due to this interaction. It would be a matter of getting used to pressing the volume button in this area and that's it, but I think it would greatly improve the experience with a simple gesture. In the settings, you have the timer available, which could possibly also help you with this type of photography, or you could also enable the floating shutter to place it in any area of the screen that you want. This front-facing camera is surprisingly good, and I say this because usually on foldables we see a quality much simpler on a front camera. But this device takes pictures with very good color representation and even good level of detail. Although we must consider that it has fixed focus and also that it is not a photo of such a high resolution, so the actual level of detail is not so high, but it takes full advantage of this sensor to give us good pictures. If we are with the arm stretched to the maximum, we will not have as much detail as we would like, but the quality is still very good. Now, take a moment to observe the outcome we achieve by switching to the rear camera and using the screen as a viewfinder. The result is quite similar in terms of color rendering and contrast. However, it's clear that we achieve a much higher level of detail when using the rear camera. This means you can capture selfies of excellent quality. But the key point here is that the front camera offers really good quality, and with the rear system, we obviously take full advantage of the new setup. The autofocus to get a completely supreme level of detail for this type of photography, detailing very much some part of your face and at the same time using the rear system. We can also access the ultra-wide camera that allows us a much wider capture and again retaining a good quality of colors, contrast and detail. Here we see another result with the front camera, so you can notice the good quality of colors that it offers us and observe that even in conditions of high contrast and detail, backlit gives us a good preview, so the result will also be positive, although the color specifically in backlit conditions seems to me to lose a little accuracy, but the light management is very good. At night it is much more noticeable that the front camera is simple. In this case it has a low level of detail. Even in night backlight conditions with the purpose of eliminating noise, it also removes several textures, so the level of detail really is very low. Also, if you don't use the screen to adjust the lighting, the result is simpler. So in night scenes, it's highly recommended to use the rear camera for more accurate color and detail, revealing textures not seen with the front camera. Using ultra-wide, we lose some detail but keep good color. Even in this type of backlit scenes, both with the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, we have a POS result. And for capturing night portraits, the front camera does a good job, although again with a bit low level of detail, so there are not too many textures, and with the rear camera notes that the result will be much better in terms of contrast and color, and we also gain a bit more textures in these night scenes. However, the front camera can't detect object depth, so portraits may seem out of focus, creating a slightly odd effect. But using the rear camera system improves portrait quality significantly with excellent blurred edge detection, focused objects and well highlighted textures. On the back, we will discover an ultra-wide 13mm camera equipped with an f2.2 aperture and autofocus, utilizing a 12-megapixel sensor. Following that, there is the 24mm main camera, which features a variable aperture ranging from f1.4 to f1.0, along with autofocus and optical stabilization using a 50-megapixel sensor. Lastly, we come across the 132mm period camera, featuring an f3.4 aperture, autofocus, optical stabilization, and a 12-megapixel sensor. Clearly, they cannot accommodate 3 sensors. High resolution in a device that tries to maximize the use of its thickness. Actually, take a look at how the camera module sticks out quite a bit, even without necessarily having high-resolution sensors. However, this part of the phone is already very slim, so if they had added high-resolution sensors along with more advanced lenses, the camera module would have stuck out in a manner that would be extremely unpleasant. But I think I would have liked to see a higher resolution sensor for the telephoto camera, because with 12 megapixels, it will be a bit limited in the long-range zoom, plus there is a very big gap between 24 and 132mm. Then all this gap will be covered with digital zoom, which still at 48mm, and we could say it's okay, but beyond that, I think it's going to get lost. The quality is obvious. It is not a 100% device focused on photography. It is a device that will be focused much more. In terms of productivity, it provides you with plenty of space. Simultaneously, it remains a compact device that fits comfortably in your pocket. Notice once again in this situation, we will have an excellent response when taking photographs. By holding down, you can access a burst mode of up to 100 photos. During our test, while attempting to capture the number 3, we observed that it responds extremely fast. You can capture the precise moment effortlessly, although the burst mode is virtually going to take 1s to start, but with little space between one and another photograph so that you can extract the exact moment. Note that we will find the ring quite comfortable to manipulate the zoom. We can also tap directly on the presets, and we will be able to tap on the screen to adjust the exposure and focus. If we want more parameters, we can go to the professional mode, where we are going to find manual adjustment of the metering type. We can also manually adjust the ISO up to 4,09,600, taking advantage of. The RGB sensor in the camera is designed to perform exceptionally well in low light conditions, especially at night. Additionally, we have the ability to manually adjust the aperture, allowing you to observe the camera's diaphragm opening and closing, which is quite rare in the traditional smartphone industry. Seeing this feature in a foldable device is truly remarkable. Furthermore, there is the shutter speed control, which can go up to 30 seconds, as well as exposure compensation, various focus types, and control over the white balance. In this case, it also allows the capture of raw photos. And another thing to mention is that within the main interface, we can open up these different styles of photography. In this case, it doesn't. Let's say X-Mesh literally here on the interface, but it's these modes that Huawei has worked on under their new X-Mesh branding. All the pictures we take with the original setting, but for example, the vivid setting intensifies the contrast and colors a little bit more, and the bright setting reduces the contrast and colors. A little bit of contrast by turning up the light in the shadows, plus the mono setting will also be available. So we have several photography styles for you to find your favorite. And regarding this smart capture, note that we are not going to find a scanner directly in the main camera interface, but note that we can go directly to the document mode, and here it will automatically detect these sheet edges. It also gives us the capability to use the ultra-wide camera, which means that even if you find yourself in a situation where you do not have a lot of space to scan, you can still manage to do it. In this particular scenario, please note that it will only produce a cropped photo. However, it does not enhance the color, nor does it allow us to add additional pages or anything of that nature, making it a basic scanner. If you desire a scanner with more advanced features, you will need to install external applications. I believe that in a device aiming to emphasize productivity significantly, including a more sophisticated scanner would be a beneficial addition. Please note that for QR codes, we are not going to use QR codes. Note that for QR codes, we are not going to have an immediate scan from the main interface, but we must open a lens. The shortcut is here in the lower right corner of the One Viewer. Once we enter here, we can already scan and do the actions of these QR codes. Consider something very important, because in the settings you can enter to enable 25 megapixel photos, which will still give us a higher level of detail in this. In this case, we have turned off this mode for all of the results that you will see below. Now, let's take a look at these results. Here, we are examining the ultra-wide camera, which stands out particularly for the impressive level of detail it captures. Typically, the ultra-wide cameras on devices tend to be quite basic, but in this instance it delivers tremendous detail, with little to no chromatic aberration. And it manages edge distortions remarkably well. The color is also very accurate, and we are going to find something very similar for the main camera. Then they behave in an excellent way. In fact, the main camera has even more detail. That's why this device gets to stand out too much in photography. Note that it also offers us a 48 and crop, that is its 2x with optical quality, because if it maintains very good level of detail. Although the optical zoom is quite far away, it goes up to 5x with 132 mm, so there is a lot. The space causes the zoom at very close distances to sometimes lack detail. However, when you reach a zoom of 5.5x, you regain a good level of detail. It performs quite well in these scenarios. At 10x zoom, I would say it's the maximum where the quality remains good enough. Let's take another look at a different zoom level so you can notice how this device still appears to have a mid-range zoom capability. This is positive, but when dealing with scenes that have a much longer range, as in this case, it begins to lose some detail, even though it applies a good level of optimization. The maximum zoom allowed is 50x, and that is what you are seeing right now. It's quite clear that the long-range zoom is of such quality that this would be an area to improve for future generations. However, even within the folding type, it competes perfectly well in terms of zoom. And in this case, we are talking about a triptych folding. When it comes to night photography, it's interesting to note that without using night mode, the colors can occasionally appear slightly off. However, when night mode is activated, the colors are captured quite accurately. In this particular situation, the scene had a warm tone, and it is well represented in the photo. It's worth mentioning that at night, the ultra-wide camera tends to struggle significantly more compared to daytime conditions. You can observe that details, particularly around the edges, are lost, resulting in a photo that doesn't appear as high quality when using the main camera. The performance remains quite similar whether you use night mode or not. However, with night mode enabled, you notice slightly more illumination in the darker areas. Yet it appears to still lack some detail in these scenarios. Using the 48mm crop, there's again an unusual behavior concerning color management. When night mode is on, the colors are a bit more accurate, though the detail is still lacking. Meanwhile, with the zoom 5.5x camera, you observe good performance even without night mode. Curiously, if you use the night mode, the result is going to lack more detail. So this is simply a curious behavior. If there is no light present in the frame, we are going to see that the ultra-wide camera again suffers a bit too much, generating quite a lot of artifacts in the darker areas because it is not able to render those shadows well. The main camera improves, but it is still not surprising. Interestingly, at night it seems that this device suffers more than it should. With the 48mm crop, we do not have as much detail as in the daytime, and if we want to zoom up in such dark scenarios, actually the device will bet on digital zoom. Then it will use the main camera and therefore there is not so much detail. In backlit scenarios, we can see that the preview is more or less optimized, and the result with the ultra-wide camera is good in terms of light balance. The camera is also good for shadows and shadows. Even if the face is a bit far away, it does a good job. The main camera is the one that comes to perform better for the level of detail it achieves, and again, a good balance of light and shadow, although the most illuminated areas are a little overexposed if we get quite demanding. However, the camera that came to disappoint a little more was the telephoto, where we see that the dynamic range is very low. Notice that there are overexposed areas. Even the face doesn't have as much detail, possibly because of the f3.4 aperture that it has. So it's not able to compensate very well for the lighting in this type of scenario, especially in the areas of higher exposure. Because notice that in this case, with a 10x zoom photograph without such backlit areas, still the result is positive, but in too intense backlighting, it won't have as many capabilities. Regarding macro photography, note that it automatically uses the aperture f2.0. And the result is very positive, but it does not have a uniform focus. Note that there are some areas that appear out of focus if they are slightly further away than the main focus. Note that in manual mode we can use the aperture f4.0. And in this case we will have a slightly more uniform focus, so for that you could take advantage of the variable aperture that surprisingly has this camera. I say this because no foldable usually incorporates such advanced technologies, but Huawei has decided to put practically the best of its technologies in this foldable. Even so, we can also use the macro mode with the ultra-wide camera, gives us the perspective of 24mm applying a crop, and the pictures will be good. You can even apply a little more zoom if you want a little more detail, although it already looks a little more forced. But for macro photography, I think it is a device that complies. You want to maintain good quality, and as I always say, if you prefer to be a bit farther away rather than being very close. Besides the ultra-wide camera, we will discover the panoramic mode. Although it's a rather basic panoramic mode, you can quickly see that the colors are quite basic. The level of detail is also very simple, and it has a reduced dynamic range. Therefore, unfortunately, this panoramic mode is not recommended. In good light, the device captures movements well, with no swept areas. Use the fast shutter effectively. You need good lighting, as even the telephoto camera performs well in such scenes. Again, ensure excellent lighting. Finally, for portrait photography, it is a spectacular device. It has a very good foreground detection. It applies a very nice blur for the background, and the level of detail it has is very nice. Consider that. In this case, it also allows us a 48mm perspective, which looks a bit more professional as a telephoto lens, keeping a very good level of data still, and it also allows the 72mm perspective. Interestingly, it does not permit us to utilize the telephoto lens, which means that in this situation we are essentially cropping the image within the sensor. As a result, there is a slight loss of detail from this perspective. However, it still manages to produce a rather pleasing outcome, especially when taking into account that we are dealing with a triptych folding. Take a look at some additional examples here. This particular one is a backlit indoor scene, and the result appears quite impressive and aesthetically pleasing. Now imagine an outdoor scene with a somewhat complex object, and notice that in all instances the eggs are detected well to blur the background effectively. This is achieved with the perspective of 72mm. Finally, consider this photograph where we see a very pleasing bokeh effect with an almost perfect detection in the lens area and even in the hair area. For portrait photography, I find it to be an absolutely spectacular result. This device supports 4K video recording at 60 frames per second with the 3 rear cameras, and all cameras including the front can record in 4K at 30 frames per second. You can adjust the resolution by tapping this section, though I find it impractical. Alternatively, access the full settings for a simpler way to change and adjust the resolution. We can enable a special stabilization mode, but it alters resolution. There's also another tracking mode with automatic framing, so even without moving the phone, it'll follow your target. Useful for self-recording, but it uses the ultra-wide camera, reducing resolution to full HD. Then, we'll also discover the various controls that we observed with the color rendering applied to the video, which is something I truly appreciated. And it's important to note that while we're recording video, we'll have the ability to access this zoom ring once more. Additionally, We have a button for taking pictures, another button to pause and resume video recording, and yet another button to turn on the flashlight without interruption. However, unfortunately, we can't switch to the front camera without first stopping the recording. The ultra-wide camera has a video recording mode, something that is present in other Huawei devices, but not in this foldable one. Within the professional mode, we are also going to find the possibility of recording video manipulating several of these parameters while we are recording. Let's see the result of 4K 60 frames per second, because although it gives us good fluidity, I think it falls a little short in terms of detail. It seems to have a little over-sharpness. Observe the area of the farthest branches. It appears to create a sort of white effect around them, which doesn't seem to be of high quality. Therefore, despite having these capabilities, I wouldn't claim it to be a specialist in video recording. The positive aspect is that it allows us to switch to the ultra-wide camera recording with this setting, which is a good feature. However, when using the ultra-wide camera, we notice that perhaps the capability is not quite what we would desire in this scenario. This might possibly be explained by the current limitations Huawei faces with its processor. Due to US restrictions, Huawei cannot access the most modern processors. Therefore, it's possible that the video quality is affected by this issue. Observe the result at 30 frames per second. Actually, it is quite similar in terms of the white outline I mentioned earlier around the far edges, which results in a quality that I personally am not very fond of. While I believe the photography was quite impressive in numerous aspects, I feel the video doesn't quite measure up, particularly considering we are discussing a very costly device. Observe the zoom quality here. In this instance, the maximum zoom is 15 times. Here you are viewing the outcome with 10 times zoom, where it appears decent, although it has a sort of jelly effect. This, once more, leads me to believe that the video recording quality is not of the highest caliber. In addition, we were obviously talking about digital zoom. If we change to 5x is where we find the optical zoom, but note that in 2x is very much seen that it is digital zoom. In 1x again we recover good quality, and the ultra-wide camera generates more chromatic aberration in video recording. So again, in photography we were very surprised. In video remains disappointing, especially for the recorded gap that remains between the telephoto camera and the main camera. There is quite a significant portion of intermediate digital zoom range, which tends to make the video recording appear somewhat peculiar at these mid-level zoom stages. In scenes that are backlit, it's noticeable that the camera doesn't exhibit particularly remarkable behavior. In fact, it is the most disappointing aspect of the device. This is especially true because within this price range, one would typically expect video quality to be exceptional. However, I must emphasize that perhaps due to the inherent limitations of the chips themselves, we don't observe a quality that is truly outstanding or with the ultra-wide capabilities one might hope for. Neither with the main camera, which is surprising because you can notice areas with significant overexposure even though they don't completely burn out. And with the telephoto camera, we don't observe good performance, especially in backlight situations. The device does support a vivid HDR recording mode. Yet again, we notice a bit more noise than we would prefer in the shadow areas. Once more, we encounter some overexposure in the brighter regions, even with the main camera, which leads us to understand this is clearly one of its main weaknesses. Unfortunately, the video recording is not as high quality as we would have liked. Even though it supports 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR, the result isn't as positive as expected. At night, the ultra-wide camera appears quite plain, similar to what mid-range devices offer. You notice a very low level of detail, and it struggles significantly in darker areas. It attempts to manage noise effectively, but this results in a significant loss of detail. The modification to the main camera is very apparent, yet this camera lacks contrast. Regrettably, this indicates that the video recording quality is quite limited. With this cell phone, you will require well-lit environments to achieve a recording of satisfactory quality, as otherwise the device struggles significantly. Even the periscope camera, you're also going to notice that it will only be good if you are in a well-lit environment. Otherwise, the result is going to look really very bad, so it is. Very little recommended to record consumes at night in itself is a difficult task, but it is a test that we usually apply in high-end devices, and in that sense, this cell phone falls very short. Regarding stabilization, look at the result we would have recording in 4K at 60 frames per second. I think it performs pretty well when you're walking. When you're running, it's obviously going to have a harder time. Let's say that was the expected result. If we activate the super stable mode, curiously, we'll lower the resolution to full HD at 60 frames per second. In this case, with the ultra-wide camera, although it notes that, controls the movements very well. But again, at this price, we would expect that the super stable mode, if it was compatible with 4K resolution, to have a much more stable image. I would like to provide you with a more detailed explanation. Please note that even when recording with the ultra-wide camera without using the super stable mode, we can still record in 4K with fairly good stabilization. Of course, the super stable mode offers a noticeably superior stabilization. However, if your preference is for higher resolution, you can choose to record with the ultra-wide camera. This way you can achieve a balance between maintaining good detail and having decent stabilization. Additionally, the telephoto camera performs quite well in terms of stabilization in this particular scene. Believe it or not, we were walking obviously at a slow pace, but the result looks good, although with a bit of a gelatinous effect, but normal for a telephoto camera. The focus will give us a positive experience in well-lit environments. In fast movements, it adjusts well. In subtle movements, maybe it takes a little more work, but in general, I think it gives a good experience. This device also integrates a portrait recording mode, but it looks very bad. Unlike the picture where the portrait was spectacular, here you notice a lot of very cloudy edges. Fortunately, if it seems to modify the intensity of the blur depending on the distance of the person, but the truth does not look very natural to say. Another positive thing is that it does seem to keep some objects in focus, but the truth is that it does it again with a much simpler quality. It's not the same as what we saw in the picture, plus it's not a 4K video. We will also find a fast motion mode, although it is quite simple at a very low bit rate, so the image looks very poorly defined and without stabilization. For slow motion, we will find several settings. First, you are looking at full HD at 120 frames per second, which let's say would be a standard that comes from the mid-range, but we will also find full HD at 240 frames per second in this case. The files are recorded at this frame rate so that in post-production you have the flexibility to handle them as you wish. Actually, you could even go up to 160 frames per second, but keep in mind that we are referring to interpolated frames. In this scenario, the file is recorded at 30 frames per second, but notice how you can quickly see that it is attempting to predict what the intermediate frame would be. As a result, it can sometimes produce a rather unusual effect. In the front camera, something quite similar to what we previously discussed occurs. When it comes to photography, it really surprised us. However, in terms of video, it turns out to be somewhat disappointing. It doesn't seem to have the level of contrast we would have preferred, although we should keep in mind that it performs quite well in backlight situations. It's important to note that when there's a shadow over the face, it presents a much more complex scenario, yet it handles it quite effectively. However, once more, keep in mind that it has a fixed focus, so zooming in on objects is not possible, and unfortunately, in very intense backlit scenes, it might not perform as well as desired. Of course, remember that using the rear system could provide better video quality, although with the main camera, you would achieve a very close focus. But thankfully, you can switch to the ultra-wide camera and still record yourself in selfie mode with a decent enough performance in backlit conditions. However, we have already observed that it is not the most stunning video quality available on a cell phone. Indeed, when recording with the rear camera, we are capable of achieving up to 60 frames per second. This allows us to have excellent fluidity, both with the ultra-wide and the main camera. This could be a significant advantage that is present, let's say, in all foldable devices during nighttime. Here is the result when using the front camera. Note that by eliminating noise, again, a lot of detail and textures are eliminated. The video quality is very simple, even the white balance is very out of control, confirming what we have been saying throughout this review in the video section. If you try to record with the rear system, notice that also the color seems to get a bit out of control with the ultra. Wide camera having too much saturation, and again to control noise, it will remove quite a lot of textures and the video looks like as if it had a watercolor effect or something quite similar. With the main camera you gain a bit more detail, but once again we still notice a bit of oversaturation in certain scenarios. Although of course the main camera has better light input, so noise control will not be as complicated, and therefore it does not eliminate so many textures. In fact, this camera would be ideal if you want to record in selfie mode at night, because it is the one that has the best performance out of all those integrated. However, it might still fall slightly short depending on what you're comparing it against. Now, on the front camera, we're also going to find a quick camera mode, although it's quite straightforward. Additionally, the device features a dual recording mode, which is really interesting. This is because even though it allows for digital zoom, similar to many other devices, and has autofocus enabled, the standout feature here is that it also lets us switch between microphones and swap lenses. Notes that in this case we are with the ultra-wide camera, but if we can also switch to the main camera, and we can also switch to the telephoto camera to reach the maximum zoom 15x. So in this sense it surprises, although unfortunately the video is in full HD, but the fact that if it allows us to switch between the three rear cameras is a very good thing. And obviously we also have the picture-in-picture mode if we want a small floating frame, and everything keeps exactly the same. In the same manner, this box can be shifted with a slight nudge to the right, so there are some minor aspects where it does come as a surprise, but in most cases video recording is somewhat disappointing. Regarding the software, we will find HUAWEI version 14.2. Unfortunately, it comes without any update policy. As Huawei is experiencing somewhat uncertain times, we are unsure about the number of updates it will receive. However, based on Huawei's history, it generally does send updates to its devices. Older devices. While we would obviously prefer more certainty about the support this phone will receive, let me share some details about the tools included in the operating system. To begin, there are these icons, beneath which some widgets are hidden, and you can reveal them by swiping up. Generally, these are system applications with these capabilities, allowing you to access certain tools there. When it comes to customization, we also have access to these default themes. Please note that it does not include the new themes available on other Huawei devices, which makes it somewhat more limited in this area. However, it does allow us to browse a catalog of wallpapers. Additionally, we can explore an online store that offers various paid content, as well as some free options. We will additionally discover the Always On Display cover. It's important to note that it comes with some interactive features allowing us to change the cover style. If we apply it, we'll encounter a smart setting. This setting doesn't keep the screen on at all times, but it does activate virtually whenever you need it. Alternatively, you can choose to have the screen on continuously, displaying this small cover. However, unfortunately, we won't find it. The pleasant transition we see in other Huawei phones, moving between the cover, lock screen and home screen, is much simpler here. However, it does allow for an always-on display, which takes up the full screen, showcasing a background that appears quite elegant. Additionally, it offers some digital and analog clock options for you to select from. Yet, overall, it lacks the advanced customization features found in other Huawei devices. It also includes some default packs from which you can choose icons. However, it lacks additional content for downloading more icons. Keep in mind that in this scenario, it doesn't allow us to have an app drawer option. As a result, all applications will be displayed on the home screen by default. Fortunately, there is an option to create a large folder, which I think is a nice feature to help organize your content. You can easily choose to enlarge this folder, so I would really like to see a drawer of applications. However, consider that these folders can be resized in a rather interesting way. For instance, if you desire having just 3 columns, you can do that. At the same time, you can access the rest of the elements, which I find quite appealing. Additionally, there is a senior mode available that will enlarge the entire interface. Moreover, note that the one-handed mode will also be enabled, with a gesture located in the lower section, specifically within the navigation bar, even though it can be somewhat challenging to activate. However, it does manage to reduce the screen size both vertically and horizontally. Additionally, it will provide us with a few gestures, such as taking screenshots by tapping twice using the knuckle. Although on the folding screen, honestly, you might not feel inclined to tap twice with your knuckle. Yet if you do tap twice with 2 knuckles, you can initiate screen recording, or alternatively, when you draw a figure with your knuckle, you can capture a more specific snippet. I want to remind you that we will also have the option for scrolling screenshots available, allowing you to display more content than what a screen can normally show. Additionally, we will find the intelligent detection feature that enables the phone to sense when we are looking at it, preventing the screen from turning off. Moreover, and perhaps even more useful, are these gestures that allow us to control the phone. This, I mentioned, seems quite beneficial to me. It's especially useful when you're watching TikTok or something similar and you want to scroll. For instance, if your hands are wet or if you're eating and suddenly you don't want to touch the screen, well, just like that, you can scroll both upwards and downwards simply using screen gestures that actually respond quite well. Additionally, you could take a screenshot by just closing your fist and that's it. Furthermore, we will also find the option to use applications in a floating window. Please note that from any. When we have an application open and we don't want to close it, we have the option to move it to the upper right corner. By doing this, we transform the application into a small floating window. However, a slight drawback is that in this format, you can only use one application at a time, so there is a limitation. Additionally, it's important to note that we can minimize applications by simply sliding them to the edge of the screen. This allows us to have a list of multiple applications open simultaneously. In floating format, for instance, in this particular case, I already have 2 applications and they appear there. If we wish to open additional applications in floating format from scratch, we can perform this gesture, and in this manner, we discover the available applications. Fortunately, it is safe to say that we can run any application in this format, which is definitely something positive. Moreover, if we combine this floating screen mode with the split screen, we could potentially have a maximum of 3 applications running simultaneously. And we might be able to grasp it in a traditional cell phone. However, Imagine if this cell phone had the capability to expand to a much larger space. Obviously, in this context, we would be interested in seeing the ability to open even more applications in a floating format, similar to a desktop mode or something more advanced. But here, honestly, things feel more limited. It seems to me that it doesn't fully utilize all the space we have available. There's so much potential, and yet it falls short of maximizing the available space. Also, take into account that within the settings there is an option labeled stylus. However, in this instance, it doesn't appear to be compatible with any special stylus or anything of that sort. The device will also include some tools that are not typically found in all cell phones, such as measurement using augmented reality. However, it will solely rely on pure artificial intelligence, which means it lacks a LiDAR scanner that would make the measurement significantly more advanced. Additionally, it provides its own video editor known as PetalClip. However, as you can observe, it isn't particularly optimized to fully utilize the screen space, at least not from the home screen. Yet when you delve into the full editor, you can indeed enjoy the complete experience in full screen. In the gallery, you'll encounter a straightforward editor offering various tools, such as an object eraser. Although it lacks generative artificial intelligence, it doesn't involve any artificial intelligence at all. If it allows you to hold down, for instance, to detect an object and remove it, there are moments when it performs excellently. However, naturally, there could also be instances where the outcome won't be as remarkable when it comes to filling the space that was left empty. By the way, another feature of the gallery that I really enjoy is the ability to compare two photos. You can zoom in, and with a synchronized movement, you can check which photo you prefer. You can even mark it as a favorite, or delete some of them, and on such a large screen, this option is very enjoyable. The device does not have native and integrated artificial intelligence functions. Hopefully, with some update, you will gain options of that style. But if you could install Gemini or ChatGPT to enjoy something similar, although not fully integrated into the cell phone. In fact, as you already noticed, I have several Google applications installed and they work well. In the description, I leave you a video where I demonstrate the process of installing these applications. You can rest assured that a significant number of Google applications will function correctly. However, it's important to note that there are still certain applications and services that might not perform at their best, but the majority are available for use. Now, let's discuss the features that it utilizes as a foldable device. Starting off, on the main screen, there's a dock which, besides providing shortcut apps, also displays the applications. Unfortunately, this dock completely disappears when we open an application, which means there is no way to temporarily show the dock or keep it visible on the screen at all times. This feature would be quite useful, and we've observed it in other foldable devices. Now, let's take a closer look at how applications behave. As you can see that in this situation, they appear in a full screen format. If I fold the device into an intermediate format, you'll notice that the application adapts perfectly to the new configuration. And if I proceed to fully fold the device, you'll also see that the application automatically transfers itself seamlessly. In this particular case, the device does not permit customization of the behavior during the folding or unfolding process. Instead, it exhibits the native behavior that it inherently possesses. One aspect I find appealing is that when you unfold the device, the main screen remains synchronized with its pages. When using the intermediate format, and similarly, once you have fully deployed the phone, you will enjoy a very comparable experience regardless of the condition your phone is in. Naturally, certain applications will significantly benefit from the additional space available when the device is in this state. For instance, in the settings menu, you will encounter a two-column view. The same applies to the Notes application, which also utilizes the two columns, as well as the Contacts application, taking full advantage of the two-column layout. The built-in mail and messaging applications are included as well. As you can see, numerous native apps function effectively with this screen usage. Of course, various Google apps also utilize the full screen space quite efficiently. Even when the device is fully unfolded, apps like Google News, Gmail, and Google Photos make excellent use of the distributed space. We clearly observe that they leverage the available space perfectly well. However, as I had already mentioned to you before, the device appears to have minimal optimization. For instance, when we are using YouTube, you'll notice that the device does not support the flex mode to fully utilize this format and continue playing the video. Consequently, no other application will be able to take full advantage of this flex mode experience. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, a manufacturer is dedicated to providing you with this case that includes a tab allowing you to position the phone in a certain way so that you can comfortably play and enjoy your videos on YouTube. It's important to note that if you perform this gesture, you could actually fill the entire screen. In this sense, the operating system doesn't quite match up to the incredible hardware we have available. When it comes to security, it's worth mentioning that it includes a side fingerprint reader, which responds incredibly quickly. Interestingly, in this situation, the registration process is not done by simply placing and removing your finger. Instead, you need to circle over it, which might be intended to enhance the reading since the reader is quite thin. Alongside the fingerprint reader, it also incorporates facial recognition. However, this feature operates only in 2 dimensions. Therefore, the manufacturer itself suggests avoiding its use if your main concern is achieving the highest level of security. Additionally, you'll discover the Smart Unlock feature, which keeps the device unlocked when connected to accessories like headphones or watches from the same manufacturer. Nonetheless, I would have appreciated having a Smart Unlock feature that works based on location, but unfortunately, that option isn't provided here. The device will also integrate some options such as blocking applications, which can be by fingerprint or with a pattern other than your lock screen, so that you choose which applications must request a second verification before allowing its execution. It also brings its own password manager, but without synchronization in the cloud, which can save your passwords to automatically fill out some forms, but this is an aspect where the Huawei ecosystem is left it is not particularly weak since the passwords do not synchronize across all your devices. Additionally, it offers the option to locate your cell phone in case it gets lost. You can achieve this through Huawei's dedicated platform. Simply visit cloud.huawei.com to attempt to find it or even make it ring. Therefore, it provides a sufficient number of tools to protect your cell phone. Furthermore, we also have access to the file safe, where we can securely store all private and protected content. Password or fingerprint reader. The device also lets you lock the screen. If you lend your phone for a call, you can click the small floating pin from the app you want after enabling it. Now, anyone trying to leave that app can't, as the device will lock. It's useful. Additionally, if you lend someone your unlocked cell phone, there's more to consider. We will find the Twin App application, which allows you to clone apps, enabling the use of 2 accounts of the same app on your phone. Furthermore, there are additional privacy options available. With this board, you can track how many times different applications have accessed various permissions. You can observe here the access to location, camera, microphone, and other sensitive permissions. Moreover, it includes a manager where you can thoroughly analyze all these permissions and accounts. There's a mode that strips location and special tags from your photos when you share them, and there's also a super privacy mode that, with just one tap, locks the camera, microphone, and location. Additionally, you have access to the private space, which functions like a separate space on the same phone. In this private space, you can store your own applications and files separately from the main space. This setup effectively gives you the experience of having 2 phones in one device. Consider that in this case, it also involves a collaboration to thoroughly analyze any potential malware in conjunction with 360. Therefore, they offer you that level of protection, which is crucial because you will likely need to install numerous applications from sources outside of the app gallery. In this situation, I would recommend using the Aurora Store. It's the store I personally use as it connects directly to Google servers, thereby maintaining a high level of security and confidence for users. Of course, setting up this store involves certain steps that may not be very easy for some users. That's why, as I always say, these Huawei devices are something I would only recommend if you're an adventurous person who enjoys experimenting with installing external applications and similar tasks. Otherwise, it would be more advisable to seek out traditional devices. Let's discuss the battery with a capacity of 5600 mAh. It's a 3-cell battery, only 9mm thick. It's amazing they had to use the thinnest battery possible. When using the device fully folded, it seems like a great capacity, but when fully open like a tablet, the battery seems short. We ran many tests to understand it better. The battery life, when the device is fully folded and we attempt to drain it as quickly as possible, lasted 6 hours and 4 minutes, which is an incredibly impressive battery life. It even surpassed other devices that are said to have higher capacity batteries. While running the battery drainer in the background and watching videos in the foreground, it reached 12 hours. It should be noted that the battery drainer was constantly running in the background. I was closing it. It appeared to be quite aggressive with power consumption, especially with apps running in the background. This might result in some applications unexpectedly suspending and ceasing to send you notifications or not continuing tasks you set them to do. Therefore, it's crucial to go into your battery settings and decide which apps you want to keep active and running at all times. In the background, while having the device completely deployed and attempting to discharge the battery as quickly as possible, it lasted for 3 hours and 46 minutes. Honestly, this is quite impressive, especially considering the screen is very large. Keep in mind that traditional format devices with 5000 mAh batteries have offered us a similar duration, yet with smaller screens. Therefore, we observe a very good level of optimization here. While conducting the background test, it lasted 6 hours and 40 minutes, despite the behavior I mentioned where it constantly closes background apps. Then we tested by playing YouTube videos with the screen brightness at 50%. After 1 hour of video playback, the battery dropped by 5%. It's worth noting that after 18 hours of video playback, it reached 3%. At 1%, it automatically switches to an emergency mode that restricts many things to extend the battery life a lot. But to finish our test well, we came out of this emergency mode and pay close attention because with 1% lasted still very long. I told you that after 18H it was going at 3%, when it was going 18H with 17 minutes already had. 1%, but from there that 1% extended for several minutes until finally after about 18H with 45 min, it shut down. It was unable to surpass 20 hours of playback time, which is typically where devices tend to surprise us. In this particular case, when compared to devices with a traditional format, we conducted the test with the cell phone folded. Naturally, when the cell phone is fully deployed, the screen will consume significantly more energy. So by performing exactly the same test, it achieved approximately 12 hours and 25 minutes. Therefore, it won't be a device known for exceptional autonomy, but it will provide us with a decent duration. Battery, at least competitive to not be suffering. In addition, it also offers us the traditional saving mode that, let's say, that can get to help on a daily basis. And I already told you that the emergency mode is automatically activated when the device has only 1% of battery. It is not ideal to let your devices completely discharge, but if this happens, fortunately you have a very good fast charge, in this case 66 watts. Let's take a look at the graph and observe that it manages a high power, particularly during the initial few minutes. In just 15 minutes, it recovered 25% of the battery. After 30 minutes, it reached 47% and a full charge was completed in 92 minutes. However, it is quite interesting to note that there are two brief moments where there are peaks that almost stop the charging process. This might occur because the battery is divided into 3 cells, which possibly causes a dynamic change or some other occurrence. Fortunately, I believe that if you manage to get 8 charging speed is fast enough, naturally, it won't be an extremely rapid charge because of the density required for this battery to remain ultra-thin. However, I believe it achieves a nice balance between having a decent battery capacity and providing good charging power. It's important to note that the charger comes included in the box. Also, keep in mind that it supports wireless charging at 50 watts in case you happen to have the HUAWEI charger. Alternatively, you can also charge it using HUAWEI or Qi standard chargers without any issues. They are going to give you the fastest possible 15 watts charge. At times it also has reversible wireless charging, so you can put to charge accessories, something that some other folding come to sacrifice. Then it is important to see and highlight the presence of this feature in a folding trifold. It will also offer smart charging so that in case you leave your cell phone charging all night, the battery can take care of itself to avoid a very rapid deterioration and also to prevent the battery from getting damaged too quickly. It includes a charge lock feature that allows you to customize the percentage from 70 to 100%. Now, let's discuss connectivity because here we encounter one of its weaker aspects. It does not support G connection because of restrictions with the US, which means you cannot enjoy the highest speeds of your mobile data. As for Wi-Fi, it comes with Wi-Fi 6, so we do not see the latest version. However, I emphasize that this is due to the restrictions imposed on them. It's not because Huawei doesn't want to update it to be more recent. Luckily, it has a data lock mode through software, allowing you as the user to decide which applications are permitted to use your mobile data and which ones are restricted to only using Wi-Fi for internet connectivity. Another piece of bad news is that it lacks support for eSIM, and I believe that in a device aimed at productivity, this absence is quite significant and noticeable. If you often travel and want to continue working and similar activities, you will inevitably need to purchase a physical SIM card. The eSIM feature is not specifically restricted for Huawei or anything like that. This is clearly one of its weaker points, especially if you have 2 SIM card slots. It would have been significantly better to see eSIM support. Additionally, it supports Bluetooth 5.2. While it doesn't offer the latest technology, it does support Nearlink, which is Huawei's new Bluetooth standard. Say it somehow, although still not so many accessories take advantage of it. It also has NFC, so you can supposedly make mobile payments. But here we see another of the experiences that can fall because it does not have official Google services, so even if you want to install them and you manage to run some applications, what you cannot have is Google Pay or Google Wallet. Then you cannot make mobile payments so easily. You may find some application or that some. I would have liked to see this desktop type interface when you have the device fully deployed because I think you could take advantage of it. Like all good high-end, it does not have FM radio, and with respect to its USB port, we will find the version 3.1 Gen 1. It is not the latest, but if it offers a good speed of data transfer, plus it also allows us to screen projection via cable type mirror or desktop mode, So you could use this cell phone as a kind of more advanced computer, as it would allow you the execution of applications in Windows similar to the interface of a computer, although obviously limited to the own capabilities of the applications of the cell phone. In fact, this projection can also be done wirelessly, so if you connect a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, you have a pretty modern experience to work with. I would have liked to have seen this desktop-like interface when you have the device fully deployed, because I think you could take advantage of this. Better screen space, but that's not available here. With wireless projection, you also have the option to hide notifications or redirect audio. Regarding the sensors, we will find accelerometer, field sensor, geomagnetic, orientation, also gyroscope, pressure sensor. But unfortunately, the proximity sensor is virtual, and the truth is that it is of these sensors that can give you some inconvenience. It is specifically enabled. When it is in your ear, and if you are in environments with a lot of noise, it could become altered because this detection is through the microphone, so that is a disadvantage. Maybe they did it to save a little space, but if you are going to perceive that the proximity sensor does not work in the ideal way. Interestingly, it has infrared to function as a universal remote control through its own app, so it could turn on TVs, control your camera or air conditioning directly. Using the cell phone, it really provides a very good experience. Regarding Android Auto, while it can indeed be installed and utilized, the truth is that the process is somewhat intricate and at times it may not function optimally. For instance, Spotify might not be recognized on the car's display screen, although if you start it from the phone and begin playback, it will play through the speakers. However, there are small details like these that prevent the Android Auto experience from being completely 100% seamless. In addition to that, demands a significantly more intricate configuration process, which not every user will be capable of following. Now let's delve a bit into the ecosystem, because Huawei has developed something truly robust. It provides you with a highly advanced ecosystem. The interaction with your headset, watch, wristband, tablet, or computer is simply outstanding. Keep in mind that it includes Huawei Share, allowing you to share files swiftly among all these devices. Additionally, alarms or timers are synchronized with your Huawei watch. All accessories will have easy pairing. It also allows you to take pictures from Huawei Watch, or you can copy the contents from the cell phone and paste them on the computer, even control the entire cell phone from the computer, drag and drop files. You could also browse all the files on your cell phone from the computer, just like an external hard drive or USB flash drive, because it appears in the Windows File Explorer. Then the experience will be like the Windows File Explorer. It's simply fantastic. Regarding the ecosystem, thanks to its multi-device technologies, it is evident that it will officially lack Google services. However, Huawei can provide its own services, though some might be slightly more limited than others. For instance, it offers Huawei Cloud with 5 GB free, and later there are plans with additional storage for cloud backups. Huawei offers an app called AI Live for home devices, but it's not pre-installed and lacks broad support for other brands. You'll likely need other apps like Samsung SmartThings, which works well. Huawei also has its own app store, app gallery, and a health platform for tracking everything related to your physical activity, and it also includes Huawei Wallet. Unfortunately, it still doesn't let you add your own credit or debit cards for mobile payments. Therefore, Huawei still has significant work to do in developing its suite of services. I believe its ecosystem functions quite well, but its services definitely require further development. Let's test the time it takes to open applications. The Huawei Mate X-T, which is a folding trifold, comes with the Kirin 9D10 processor. This processor is somewhat unknown due to the restrictions Huawei faces, so they have to engineer it themselves. It is accompanied by 16 GB of RAM and 1 TB of storage. Now, as you can see, it took about 8 seconds on average to open each application. This is quite good, and the truth is that it is a device that feels very fast in this type of usage. Scenarios. However, let's continue cycling through these applications to determine if the 16 GB RAM is being utilized effectively. In this situation, it appears to be, as we don't observe the device starting to reload applications or anything similar. Additionally, we can switch by performing this gesture and the applications keep running smoothly. We don't encounter white screens, nor do we see applications displaying their logo again during a second opening or anything like that, so that the RAM memory is utilized perfectly well, and in this particular case, it definitely means that the device, being practically a tablet, could also encourage you to use the web browser. Then, in the same way, you could have many web browser tabs open without the fear that they are constantly restarting. Although due to the architecture of the operating system itself, it will not be completely free of reboots of applications or web tabs, but it's important to note that you can absolutely and perfectly switch between each of them once they have been opened. So we have here several tabs open, and we will also have all these applications that we previously saw. However, consider that in this particular case, we opened them with the device completely folded. Therefore, when we run them again, there may be a restart, but it genuinely is instantaneous. Notice that it does not take even a tiny bit of time, but rather they immediately adapt correctly. Some applications will only work in portrait format, so I tell you that it is also quite comfortable to have such a large screen. Through the web browser, you can actually manage to replace some applications that might not run very well on a screen of this size. However, this same behavior is something we even notice on an iPad, so it is not something that should concern you too much. As I mentioned earlier, it has a terabyte of storage, which is simply incredible. We couldn't expect anything less from such an expensive device. And let's run the speed test with Antutu. I'll update you once it's complete. As you can see, the read speed is 1956 megabytes per second, and the write speed is 1791 megabytes per second for those interested in benchmark numbers. Let's do more testing to demonstrate performance. For instance, notice that a Facebook feed doesn't freeze at any point, more than just the moments when new content will load, but generally it remains quite fluid both when scrolling down and scrolling up. A very similar experience will occur with any other application, so there's no need to worry about performance issues. However, I must mention that in applications needing graphics processing, there could be instances of incompatibility or times when the device might really struggle. So consider this: if you enjoy applications that typically involve real-time graphics processing, then I believe this device, unfortunately, might not be able to provide you with a satisfactory experience. Of course, this issue doesn't occur with every app. For instance, with Snapchat it happens, but notice how with Instagram, that issue doesn't arise. In this particular case, it seems to handle processing in a much better manner. Then, it might vary depending on the specific app you are using. However, there is a chance that certain apps might not display a high level of compatibility when they include graphics processors. Now, let's proceed to test how much time it takes to export these videos. As usual, they have a total duration of 1 minute, and in this scenario, they will be in 4K resolution at 30 frames per second. Now, we just need to wait for it to finish exporting the video, and then that's all. It took around 35 seconds, which honestly wasn't bad at all, especially considering it was a video in 4K. Although it is certainly not the highest power we can find in the smartphone world, as I mentioned, due to Huawei's current limitations because of US restrictions regarding games. Interestingly, in the application settings, there's a section called App Assistant, which is actually a game assistant. And for some reason, the name doesn't quite fit well. But take note that here it will let us access this gaming area, which we can add as a shortcut to our main screen. Now, in this games area, you'll notice that we're going to discover some quick shortcuts. For instance, we can speed up the memory and clean it to give priority to the game. Additionally, we have the option to activate a do not disturb mode to avoid any kind of interruptions, and we can also prevent operations from occurring. Accidental, to avoid being forced out of the game or anything similar. In fact, you can also turn off the knuckle gestures to prevent accidental activations and block the automatic brightness. This way, even if you cover the sensor with your hands while playing, it won't reduce the brightness. Additionally, we have enough sensitivity tools while gaming. Also, take note that the interface appears more or less customized based on the game you are playing and when you started it as well. By swiping from top to bottom, you will have a set of tools at your disposal. Once again, you will find the same switches that we observed a moment ago. However, it adds extra features like taking screenshots and even screen recordings. Although these recordings cannot be customized, you can also open certain applications in a floating window mode while playing. This is particularly useful if you want to respond to messages or do something similar without needing to exit your current activity. Game. But let's proceed to the tests, starting with Call of Duty. In this case, the default graphics quality is set to very high, and the frame rate is also very high. We can increase it to an ultra frame rate, but then the graphics quality will drop to the lowest level. This indicates that it doesn't have as extensive compatibility as the latest generation processors, once again due to Huawei's own limitations. Notice that by prioritizing the highest possible graphic quality available to us, the experience turned out to be quite good. We consistently achieved an average of 60 frames per second with excellent stability. There were very few fluctuations, and the ones that did occur did not significantly drop the frame rate. The lowest point recorded was 55 frames per second, meaning you can comfortably play with this device. However, it is worth mentioning that the temperature did increase notably to 44 degrees Celsius, and just in this game that is not so complex, gives us to understand that it is a device that is not going to manage its temperature very well. Then we gave priority to the frame rate per second, and notes that in this case reaches 89 frames per second on average. It must be said that normally devices with this setting reach up to 120, but we must remember that in this case the screen is 90 Hz, so it fits properly, and the truth is that it behaves well. The game runs smoothly, graphics are acceptable, and the temperature was better controlled. Then we played PUBG. Default is HD at high rate, but we can go up to Ultra HDR at ultra rate. For extreme rate, lower graphics quality, 120 FPS isn't available due to screen limits. The experience was good, and the highlight is that if you can have a screen large enough to play on that still fits in your pocket, then indeed you will find a very good experience in that regard. In fact, while playing this game, it didn't even heat up much. It will, however, depend on the games you enjoy and the graphics settings you prefer. The device does have strong capabilities, but keep in mind that some games might face more challenges running smoothly due to the lack of pre-installed Google services in the factory, and then in some other content, you will notice that you might not be able to install it or it might not run correctly. So it's crucial to ensure your favorite game is compatible before you decide to purchase a Huawei device. Then when you run Arena Breakout, take note that in this situation we elevate it to the maximum level at an ultra rate. Interestingly, when we begin the screen recording, it doesn't allow us to select 90 frames per second. However, if we start recording afterward, it becomes enabled. So, in this adjustment of the graphics quality, we prioritize the graphics quality to begin our testing process. As you can observe, it maintains a steady 60 frames per second, providing good quality visuals. The details appear sharp, and the experience feels smooth, stable, and visually impressive. We don't encounter any negatives here. Additionally, since it's such a thin device, it offers a lighter feeling compared to holding a traditional tablet, which means you won't tire as quickly. Therefore, if you plan to transmit or stream, it's a suitable choice. This sense of comfort in a compact device with a large screen prioritizing frames per second, note that if we could run it at a high rate, the average was 86 frames per second. Overall, it maintains a good experience. The processor seems to have good capacity, not at the industry's top, but it performs well. We played Asphalt and noted that we tried to adjust the quality in this case up to the maximum in all configurable settings, and here it disappoints because it only averaged 36 frames per second. It stays fairly stable, but the peak was 48 frames per second, which doesn't provide a smooth gaming experience. It will have fluctuations significant for a high-end device, though less noticeable in practical use, but definitely. We then proceeded to play War Thunder, which is known to be one of the most complex games out there. In this scenario, we set the graphics to the highest possible settings, including the most intricate anti-aliasing options. This creates a rather complicated configuration. This confirms what I was mentioning earlier. Similar to what happened with Snapchat, this processor might encounter certain difficulties when dealing with graphics-intensive tasks. Therefore, it is not advisable to engage in playing very complex content with it. This game is among those where the stability was quite poor, dropping down to as low as 11 frames per second occasionally, and the temperature was rather high. Therefore, it is definitely not advisable to play very complex content. In fact, the processor lacks support for ray tracing, which places it far behind more advanced competitors when it comes to graphics. Finally, we played Genshin Impact, which is initially set to medium quality by default. For our test, we adjusted the settings to the highest possible quality, with 60 frames per second and all the complex features enabled. In this scenario, it appears that the device intelligently attempted to adapt to minimize fluctuations, so it was capped at 50 frames per second to ensure better stability. It's quite evident that this processor acknowledges its own limitations, which means that the performance might decrease. In certain environments, it becomes quite evident that this is not a device specifically designed for gamers. Although the concept of carrying such a large screen for gaming directly in your pocket sounds fantastic, the reality is different. Due to the current limitations that Huawei faces with processors in the global market, this idea unfortunately does not fully materialize. Nevertheless, you could still enjoy gaming by opting for lower graphic settings, which would result in improved performance. However, let's say that the overall quality of the gaming is more mid-range than high-end. In conclusion, the most appealing feature of this cell phone is its ability to transform from a traditional phone into a mini or full tablet. You'll enjoy a large screen that fits in your pocket, The screen hardware is spectacular, the sound is excellent, and the cameras compete well in photography, though not the best, they still compete well. When recording video, you'll start to notice the processor's limitations, which are due to US restrictions. This means that the power will also appear somewhat limited. Additionally, optimization with certain games won't be something that this cell phone can really boast about. However, the battery life is surprisingly competitive. This is especially noteworthy because the device is very slim, yet it actually has well-optimized batteries. Fast charging also helps, without being the most spectacular thing, but by supporting wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, it gives you the experience of a high-end. But I think where Huawei needs to work much more would be in the software, because despite being a trifold device, it does not get to take advantage of a flex mode 4. When the screen is semi-folded in this format or in some others, then it is perceived as the software is not as mature to take advantage of all the features of the device. Form factor capabilities that they could have. And yes, I know it comes without Google services. But through Micro G you can install and use most services. Google Pay would not be available, and Android Auto, although it can be installed, may have some complications. For now we have come to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can point it out. And we'll see you next time.